the hidden power network behind modern capitalism. It begins with a paradox. For all the talk about free markets, open competition, and the invisible hand, the real story of modern capitalism is far less chaotic and far more coordinated. Behind the world's largest economies lies a quiet architecture of power, institutions, families, treaties, and financial mechanisms designed not to be seen, yet impossible to operate without. This is the hidden network that shaped the modern economic order, not through conspiracy, but through influence, design, and decades of strategic decisions. 1. The paradox of the invisible hand. Imagine a trading floor in New York. Screens glow with numbers, traders shout orders, and fortunes shift in milliseconds. It looks like pure freedom. Millions of people buying and selling without a single person in charge. But step back, and you find a deeply structured system. Global reserve currencies, central banks, international lenders, credit rating agencies, and long-standing treaties that determine how money flows. Markets appear free because the architecture behind them is so well hidden. And to understand how this network emerged, we need to go back, not just decades, but centuries. 2. From empires to bankers, the early blueprint. Capitalism didn't begin on Wall Street. Its foundations were laid in the trading houses of Amsterdam and London during the 17th century. The Dutch created the first modern stock exchange. The British built the first global credit system. Private financiers funded empires, supplied armies, and underwrote the earliest multinational corporations. These institutions operated across borders long before nations agreed on how money should move. They formed the first primitive network of global finance, a web of merchants, insurers, bondholders, and bankers whose influence often exceeded that of kings. By the 19th century, this network evolved into something far more structured. The Rothschild banking family created one of the earliest international financial information systems. British insurers pooled global maritime risk. American industrialists centralized capital at a scale never seen before. The world was slowly learning that money itself could be organized into a system, and whoever controlled the system would shape the future. 3. 1944, the meeting that rewired the world. If modern capitalism has a birthday, it was the summer of 1944. In a quiet resort in New Hampshire, 44 nations gathered to rebuild the global economy after World War II. The Bretton Woods Conference created the institutions that still influence global capitalism today: the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, a new global trade framework, and, eventually, the modern dominance of the US dollar. These were not secret organizations. Their power lies precisely in their legitimacy and in their ability to shape economic rules across continents. They standardized exchange rates, stabilized currencies, and provided a playbook for how nations should manage their economies. Overnight, a network that had once been informal became institutional. 4. The rise of central banking power. While global institutions set the broad rules, another layer of influence emerged at the national level: central banks. The US Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, and their counterparts became the guardians of economic stability. They control interest rates, regulate banks, and manage crises. But more importantly, they coordinate with each other. Through global groups like the Bank for International Settlements, sometimes called the Central Bank of Central Banks, these institutions meet, share data, and align policy. The power is not dramatic. There are no flashing screens or breaking news headlines. It's quiet, technical, and continuous, yet capable of deciding the fate of nations. 5. The unseen influence of credit rating agencies. By the late 20th century, another player entered the network: private credit rating agencies. These companies, Standard & Poor's, Moody's, and Fitch, began issuing judgments on the financial health of countries and corporations. A single downgrade could raise borrowing costs for an entire nation. An upgrade could stimulate foreign investment. They do not pass laws, yet their evaluations shape the flow of global capital more effectively than many governments. This influence is subtle but profound. 6. The age of multinational giants. As governments and financial institutions built the architecture of capitalism, corporations learned to move through it. By the early 2000s, multinational companies became de facto global actors. Their supply chains spanned continents. Their revenues exceeded the GDP of small countries. Their decisions impacted labor markets, currencies, and raw materials. Today, only a handful of firms dominate entire sectors, from technology and energy to food and logistics. Their strategic alliances, patents, and market positions form another layer of the hidden network. 7. How the network really works. When we talk about a power network, it's easy to imagine a secret group controlling everything, but the truth is more complex and more fascinating. Modern capitalism is shaped by interdependence, not conspiracy. Central banks coordinate to prevent global recessions. Governments follow trade rules set decades earlier. Multinational corporations negotiate with countries for access and favorable regulations. Investment funds manage trillions of dollars that move across borders in seconds. Commodity markets set prices long before consumers see them. And the world S reserve currency, the US dollar, acts as the backbone for global trade. No one controls the whole system, but everyone who plays a role contributes to its direction. 8. Today's networked power. In the 21st century, the network has expanded again. Now it includes large-scale sovereign wealth funds, global asset managers, tech companies that operate their own financial platforms, cross-border regulatory bodies, digital payment networks, and new players in Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. Where wealth once flowed mainly through Europe and North America, it now circulates through a far more complex web. The structure of capitalism has become so interconnected that a shock in one corner, whether a pandemic, a banking failure, or a geopolitical conflict, can ripple across the entire planet in days. 9. The modern paradox. The greatest mystery of modern capitalism is that its power is both decentralized and concentrated. No single entity dictates the system, yet the system shapes every aspect of modern life. Rules made decades ago still influence how nations borrow, how companies grow, and how individuals build wealth. The hidden network behind capitalism is not dark or sinister. It is simply the accumulated architecture of human decision-making, a structure built layer by layer over centuries, now so vast and interconnected that no one can fully map it. 10. Conclusion. The price of interdependence. Modern capitalism runs on trust. Trust that banks will operate tomorrow. Trust that currencies will hold value. Trust that international rules will remain stable. Trust that nations, corporations, and institutions will act predictably. But this trust depends on a network the public rarely sees. A network that keeps the system stable until it doesn't. Understanding this architecture doesn't just reveal how the world works. It reveals why it works the way it does, through coordination, through history, through institutions, and through a web of influence built over centuries. The hidden power behind capitalism is not a secret organization. It is the system itself. 11. Inside the machine. How influence flows. Influence in modern capitalism does not look like old world power. There are no thrones, no imperial charters, no royal decrees. Instead, it flows through balance sheets, treaties, and algorithms. The most powerful institutions in the world rarely make headlines. A small change in interest rates by the Federal Reserve can lift or crash global markets. A statement from the IMF can shape a country's election. A policy meeting in Basel can determine how banks everywhere measure risk. This influence is rarely direct. It operates through ripple effects, predictable, measurable, and deeply embedded in the financial fabric. It is power not by command, but by design. 12. The network's 3 core pillars. Modern capitalism rests on 3 interlocking pillars. Each has its own logic, but none can function without the others. Pillar 1. Monetary power. Central banks control liquidity, currency strength, and financial stability. Their policies determine the price of borrowing and the value of savings. Pillar 2. Institutional power. Bodies like the IMF, World Bank, WTO, and OECD define global rules, shape development paths, and enforce standards. Their frameworks dictate how economies grow, trade, and integrate. Pillar 3. Corporate power. Multinational corporations, from oil giants to tech platforms, shape real-world markets through scale, innovation, and capital mobility. Their decisions influence jobs, supply chains, and even diplomacy. These 3 pillars create a triangular balance, each reinforcing and restraining the others. 13. The quiet power of global asset managers. In the last 2 decades, a new force emerged: global asset managers. Firms like BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street collectively oversee tens of trillions of dollars in assets. Their power is structural. They are not governments, yet they vote in shareholder meetings of major corporations. They do not pass laws, yet their investment models influence entire markets. Their algorithms decide where capital flows: into bonds, equities, real estate, emerging markets, or safe havens. That decision alone can shape the destiny of nations. This is one of the most under-discussed components of the hidden network: the rise of passive capital as a silent global actor. 14. The digital layer, a new invisible architecture. For most of history, money moved physically: gold, silver, cash, paper bonds. Today, it moves through digital networks operated by private companies and public regulators. Payment systems like SWIFT, Visa, MasterCard, and growing digital platforms form a new layer of power. This layer can freeze transactions, trace flows, and enforce sanctions across borders. Technology companies now handle billions of financial interactions daily, effectively becoming infrastructure for the global economy. The architecture of capitalism is no longer just banks and governments. It is code. It is servers. It is data centers silently processing the world's wealth. 15. The geopolitical dimension. Economics does not exist in a vacuum. Every financial system is shaped by geopolitical realities, and modern capitalism is no exception. The dominance of the US dollar gives the United States unique leverage. Energy markets priced in dollars amplify that influence. Nations with emerging power, China, India, and regions like the Gulf, are building parallel institutions and currency frameworks to reduce dependence on the current system. What began as a post-war order is now a contested landscape where economic influence is a form of soft power. Loans can replace soldiers, trade agreements can redraw borders, currency reserves can shift alliances, geopolitics and capitalism are no longer separate. They are intertwined. 16. Crises that tested the network. Every crisis reveals how the network actually functions. The 1970s oil shock showed how commodity cartels could challenge the system. The 2008 financial crisis exposed how interconnected the world had become and how central banks must act in unison to stabilize it. The COVID-19 pandemic demonstrated the scale of emergency liquidity central banks could provide and how critical global supply chains were. Each crisis could have broken the system. Instead, they reinforced its interdependence. The network survived because it adapted, and because each pillar stepped in to support the others. 17. The future of the power network. The hidden architecture behind modern capitalism is evolving faster than ever. 3 new forces are reshaping it. Digital currencies. Central banks are developing their own digital systems, potentially transforming global payments. AI-driven economics algorithms already influence market direction. Soon they may guide policy. Multipolar finance. New development banks and regional financial blocs are rising in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The era of a unidirectional power network is fading. A more complex, multi-layered network is emerging, one that may be more resilient, but also more unpredictable. 18. The human element. Amid all the institutions, treaties, and algorithms, it's easy to forget that the system is ultimately shaped by people. Economists debating policy, bankers managing risk, engineers writing financial algorithms, politicians negotiating trade agreements, workers building the goods that travel across continents. The system feels mechanical, but it is human decisions, informed by incentives and constrained by history, that keep it moving. This is why the network is neither benevolent nor malevolent. It is simply the collective outcome of billions of choices across time. 19. The final revelation. The hidden power network behind modern capitalism is not a puppet master. It is an ecosystem, a structure built to maintain stability, efficiency, and growth, but one that also concentrates influence among those who understand it best. Its real power lies not in secrecy, but in complexity. Most people never see the system because the system is everywhere, in prices, in policies, in currencies, in the way nations interact. To understand modern capitalism is to understand this network. And to understand the network is to see the world not as a series of isolated events, but as a web of forces constantly shaping one another. It is a system built by history, managed by institutions, and powered by trust. A system that quietly guides the rise and fall of economies, and will continue to do so for generations.